You assume pain means absence. You interpret it as failure, of protection, of balance, of divine favor. You seek to remove it as if peace depends on its disappearance. Yet Abdul Qadir Gilani said pain is not the mark of distance, but of attention. It exposes the limits of your own control and points to what does not depend on you. He taught that when resistance ends, pain becomes a kind of prayer, a form of remembrance without words. You call pain interruption, but he called it communication. If the real uses what breaks you to speak through you, then perhaps what you resist is not suffering itself, but the exposure of what you truly depend on. What if pain is not what separates you from the divine, but what returns you to it? Pain reveals boundary. It shows that the self's control is conditional. The body, thought, and will all reach points beyond their reach. Abdul Qadir considered this recognition a mercy disguised as discomfort. Pain corrects the illusion of independence. When mind meets what it cannot change, awareness glimpses what is larger than itself. This realization is not punishment. It is the collapse of false authority. Dependence, seen rightly, is not weakness, but relation. The clear acknowledgment that existence is not self-sustaining. Yet the mind resists such clarity, clinging to mastery as identity. Can you recognize that the end of control might be the beginning of understanding? You resist pain instinctively. You defend, explain, or flee. You call this survival. But Abdul Qadir said resistance converts revelation into torment. What hurts is not merely the event, but the insistence that it should not be. Resistance argues with what already is. When that argument stops, pain becomes perception. This is why the same experience can be despair for one mind and awakening for another. The difference lies not in circumstance, but in interpretation. The self that insists on control prolongs its own distress. When awareness pauses, suffering begins to dissolve into comprehension. The question is not, why do I hurt? But why do I refuse what is real? The shift Abdul Qadir described is subtle. It is not submission to pain, but recognition of authorship. Reality does not ask permission to appear. It simply unfolds as the decree of the real. The moment you stop claiming to stand apart from that decree, a new clarity forms. He called this turning the beginning of prayer. Not because words are spoken, but because the self ceases to demand explanation. When the question, why me, ends, awareness opens to what is being shown. That opening is the conversion of pain into invocation. Does faith begin here, or does the self end here? You treat prayer as request, a means of changing condition. Yet Abdul Qadir described true prayer as acknowledgment, not appeal. It is not a call for alteration, but a recognition of reality as it stands. When every defense collapses, what remains is pure seeing. Pain becomes prayer because it removes distraction. In that nakedness, attention no longer negotiates. It simply recognizes that to pray, then, is to be transparent to truth. When pain reveals dependence, awareness prays by existing consciously within what is real. Does prayer, then, require words or only the absence of resistance to what already is? Even within pain, something observes it. The one who knows it is happening is not the one who suffers. Abdul Qadir called this the inner listener, the awareness that remains constant while experiences pass. The body reacts, the mind interprets, but awareness simply knows. When attention rests there, pain loses its claim to identity. It becomes an event, not a definition. You realize that awareness itself is untouched. That realization shifts prayer from action to being. Perhaps the soul's truest devotion is not the cry for help, but the simple recognition: I am aware. Therefore, I belong to what is aware. Abdul Qadir taught that suffering dismantles false identity. Every image you defend, strong, capable, deserving, weakens under helplessness. The collapse feels like loss, but it is correction. What falls away is not strength, but pretense. The pain you experience is the undoing of illusion. When no role remains to protect, sincerity appears. In that exposure, prayer becomes real because nothing false can sustain it. Pain purifies language, stripping it of display. Through this collapse, you meet what remains when all self-descriptions fail. But if the one who prayed was only an image, then who or what continues the prayer when the image disappears? Acceptance is not passivity. It is clarity free of demand. Abdul Qadir said acceptance is intelligence purified of condition. It sees what is, not what it wants. When resistance fades, the pattern of reality reveals coherence. What seemed chaos is instruction. Pain becomes a question answered not by change, but by understanding. Acceptance does not end effort. It ends contradiction. The will aligns with truth rather than arguing against it. When the mind no longer insists on outcomes, comprehension replaces confusion. Has pain, then, achieved its purpose? To teach you what cannot be possessed or lost. When resistance ceases, a quiet understanding appears. Abdul Qadir called this presence not emotion but lucidity. It is the moment awareness no longer divides reality into what should be and what is. Pain, stripped of story, reveals immediacy. Presence is not earned. It is uncovered when interference ends. The soul no longer prays for the real to arrive, because the real never departed. What once was called suffering becomes proximity. To remain in this awareness is to live within prayer itself. When there is no distance left to close, what meaning remains in asking or pleading? Every trial, Abdul Qadir said, hides a mercy that only understanding reveals. The one who endures consciously emerges changed, quieter, more proportioned, less deceived by control. Pain teaches measure. What belongs to you is temporary. What belongs to truth is permanent. Gratitude arises naturally, not for pain itself, but for what it exposed. You thank reality for removing what concealed dependence. This gratitude is not reaction. It is recognition. It marks the moment when awareness aligns with order. Perhaps gratitude is not the result of prayer, but its final form, the acknowledgment that nothing was ever outside the real. You began by separating pain from prayer, one to be avoided, the other to be performed. Through Abdul Qadir's reasoning, you see they are not two movements but one. Pain removes illusion. Prayer affirms truth. Both return the self to awareness of dependence. The wound that seems silence becomes communication. The ache that felt empty becomes evidence of presence. What once looked like absence is now the exact point of encounter. To suffer consciously is to pray without words, not as effort, but as correspondence with what is. When every defense dissolves, pain no longer speaks to God. It speaks as the acknowledgment that only God remains. You now understand that pain was never error but instruction. Its lesson was perception, not endurance. Abdul Qadir's hidden practice shows that disturbance can be guidance when viewed without resistance. Awareness matures through what it cannot control. The one who knows this no longer seeks to escape, for the real is evident even within affliction. When comprehension replaces reaction, thought becomes still, not because it is silenced, but because nothing remains to question. Pain has fulfilled its task. It has revealed the prayer that exists before words, and the peace that needs no relief to be whole.